TellyCast, the TV industry news review.
Hi, I'm Justin Crosby, and welcome to this week's TellyCast. It's a true crime special this week, and my guests are John Ford, media consultant and head of programming at True Crime Network, and Will Hanrahan, founder and creative director of leading true crime producer FirstLook TV. This week's show is sponsored by Moore Kingston Smith, the specialist advisors and accountants for TV, film and radio companies. Their dedicated office of over 100 media specialists is based in the heart of Medialand in the West End of London. They understand the TV industry and what keeps TV bosses awake at night. The Moore Kingston Smith team works closely with many trade bodies such as APA, WFTV, Animated Women, British Arrows and PACT. They've delivered many high-profile industry projects, including advice regarding the qualification of British films and preparation of applications to the DCMS, liaising with national authorities and monitoring projects and applications to the Foreign Entertainers Unit, as well as the certification of production costs for film, television, animation and video games productions. As one of the UK's top 20 accounting and advisory firms, Moore Kingston Smith provides a complete service offering to the TV industry, including corporate finance, tax structuring, employment service, and efficient personal tax planning. They're also a member firm of Moore Global Network Limited, meaning they're well placed to support you and your business with any international requirements you may have. To find out more, just search Moore Kingston Smith. On this week's show, I'm delighted to welcome two of the TV industry's most experienced professionals working in the true crime space. John Ford is a hugely experienced senior US TV executive whose career includes leadership roles at Discovery, where he was president of the content group for Discovery Networks US and latterly president and general manager at Discovery Channel. In between these roles, John was Executive Vice President of Programming at National Geographic Channel. He was also General Manager, US TV Trade Association, NPACT. John's now a consultant to producers, networks and other media and technology clients on the launch, strategy, programme development, production and overall management of national media properties. Clients have included Travel Channel, WeTV, RLTV and multiple production companies producing for network TV. He's also currently head of programming for True Crime Network. And Will Hanrahan, founder and creative director at award-winning UK production company FirstLook TV. Will founded FirstLook TV following a 20-year career in investigative journalism with the BBC. He presented a wide range of current affairs shows on radio and TV for the corporation, including Watchdog, Family Matters and Verdict. In 2015, FirstLook launched a specialist unit to exploit Will's investigative journalism heritage and produce crime documentaries. Since then, the company's become the UK's biggest producer of true crime documentaries and supplies content to many broadcasters and streamers, including Netflix, BBC, Foxtel, ITV, Amazon Prime, UK TV, Reels, CBS and Sky. Recent successes include long-running investigative brands 21st Century Killer, Nurses Who Kill, Inside the Mind of a Serial Killer, Stalkers Who Kill, The Jury Room and A Killer's Mistake. So, welcome to the show, John and Will.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you.
John, coming to you first, you're a veteran of the unscripted TV industry. You know, your time as president of Discovery Channel, National Geographic, your time there, and NPACT as well. Before we come on to talking true crime, how have you seen the pandemic affecting your various producer, tech and network clients? How do you see the outlook for the US industry this winter?
It's been a troubling time for a lot of people. And as Will knows and will confirm, producers have had to adapt to keep on producing. I think it's been remarkable how producers have been able to employ new technology and old technology to actually get the job done when there are travel restrictions and social distancing and face mask requirements and all the other things that we're familiar with now. So I think the industry is doing well in coping. At the same time, it's taking more time and in some cases more money to produce this way. And it's not desirable. And the other thing that really affects the networks and by extension producers is that at least in the US, the advertising has gone down. You have advertisers not participating because they don't have anything to advertise, like travel and leisure and entertainment and restaurant clients.
Yeah.
That has a compounding effect because with that demand taken away, prices for advertising go down. So even if you're a network and you fill all your time, the advertisers are paying less because they can, because there's less demand for advertising, because there's a whole industry that's not present. So that's tightened budgets. And obviously on the drama side, it's pretty much locked down production. It's very hard to produce a drama when you can't get near each other. It's a very tough situation. There's adaptation going on that I think we're all proud of and we can point to. But I think the outlook is this, for at least in the US, business is not going to come back until we have some kind of vaccine.
And in the meantime, specifically talking about the US, do you think we're likely to see a large amount of M&A activity? Do you think this is, I've heard many people talking about this is sort of disruption on steroids, and legacy companies, if they haven't had a proper digital plan, then they're going to be in real trouble now. Do you see this creating a profound change in the US TV industry?
It could. The interesting thing about mergers and acquisitions right now is some people had made offers for companies to buy them. And then when the pandemic hit and everybody's value dropped, they didn't have enough money, or they couldn't get borrowing to finance the transaction, or they realized that the asset they were about to buy is worth a lot less, and so they couldn't agree on price. So you've had a compounding effect there where, yes, prices are down so that, CBS Viacom, for example, stock is a lot lower than it was back in January. Nobody has the money in the media industry to buy them right now. So it's a double effect. So CBS, Viacom, Discovery, AMC, all of those companies that are considered sort of free radicals right now, where they don't belong to giant conglomerates like NBC Universal or ABC Disney. Those companies nominally should be M&A targets, but right now they may not want to sell because the price is so low, and buyers may not be able to come up with the financing to buy them. So it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah. One of your current consultancy roles is that of head of programming for True Crime Network. And we're focusing on true crime, obviously, in this week's show. It really seems to go from strength to strength as a genre, with new networks seemingly launching all the time and streaming platforms reinvigorating the genre. When's the bubble going to burst?
I don't know that it is, because when you think about it, crime, either in dramatic form or fiction, has been a staple of TV practically since the beginning, with Dragnet. And I think part of it is because true crime, particularly a homicide, is an incredibly dramatic, traumatic thing to encounter in real life. We're all afraid of it, right? So it captures our attention when we hear about it. It's almost a survival method. You want to hear about this so you can take precautions. There's a sort of primitive appeal about a murder story. The second part is that they're always great stories. There's a clear beginning. There's a homicide. There's a middle. How do they track down who did it? And an end. You bagged your man or woman, and they go to jail. So it has a nice dynamic of a story going for it. And particularly for women, and women are the predominant audience for true crime, which a lot of people don't realize outside our business. I've seen articles where a lot of women talk about it as kind of like a prevention mechanism. So I want to watch this so I can figure out why somebody tries to kill somebody, so I won't get in that situation myself. And then there's just your fascination with anything as horrible as a murder. Like, who did it? Why did they do it? How could they do such a thing that is fundamentally wrong for us as humans? So I think the fascination will hold for a long time.
Well, obviously you've been producing many very successful, long-running investigative true crime shows over the years. Are you seeing demand as strong as ever?
I am. And in fact, in the last 2 years particularly, we are now receiving cold calls from channels saying, can you fill our schedule? Can you give us some true crime content? Now, I echo everything John has just said. In many respects, he's taken the wind from my sails, because that's what I'm finding. People want stories with a beginning, in the middle, and an end. They want authentic stories. And they also want to be informed about how the justice system works, and also that they can trust the detectives involved. That's a big part of watching. And that doesn't seem to go away in terms of audience demand. So that, as John says, most of the content that we produce is watched by women. We get male, but I think it's something like 60-40 in favor of women who watch our content. And we get a lot of communication from them. And I think what we're at now is we're having comparisons being made. So we're now within subgenres, finding that the audience is getting quite sophisticated. So some will want the stories told in one particular form, others will want it in another form, and so on. And so rather than a bubble being burst, more bubbles are being made. And so you've got these subgenres within true crime for which there's a demand. I'm a great believer in following the audience. If the audience says it wants something, then give the audience that very thing. I think what might put a limit on growth and expansion of other producers coming in is just, as you guys were talking at the very outset of the podcast, it's the funding of this content. It's so difficult because journalism costs, good journalism particularly costs. And I think that will put a check on the number of channels that come into the market. I don't think it's going to put a check on the demand.
So what's the secret then in creating a great true crime show?
For me, it is about the storytelling. We have this debate here at this place all the time about, are we producing reportage? Here is a series of events, they happened, take away that information, reflect on it the way you will. Or are we actually trying to make filmic content with our own driving narrative concept behind it? And the truth is, I think it's a mixture of both. I would say that there isn't such a thing as a perfect program, but in the quest for the perfect programs, what I always do is, I'm afraid I'm going to echo what John said, if you've got a narrative which has a very clear beginning and a middle and an end, and it's true, and you successfully tell that narrative in a way which allows for, and this is the asterisk, I call it the asterisk moment here at our office. I say, where's the fiction sensibility? So that what we know from watching crime drama is that it is rich with suspense, it's rich with emotional immersiveness. Often those dramas are based on real stories. We, I think, try to find that same suspenseful, immersive sensibility as we tell our story, because I talk about the omnipotent observer here. We kind of land on a series of events. We know how it's ended because we've done all of our research. But the detective, when they are first called into a murder story, because predominantly that's what we work with, they don't know. And even if they do know, they can't prove it, so they have to find the evidence. So I think a good true crime program does take you on a journey, the detective's journey in a sense, but you're the viewer detective. And you are omnipotent in as much as you can take it into different directions. And as you do so, I think it's important to remember the humanity of the story and that we are dealing with real people's lives. And so often I will try to immerse people in the real life story of the victim and give the victim a voice in that sense. I think that's the hardest thing to achieve, because actually you've then got a dilemma. Are you a television program which is seeking to show how emotionally disturbing it is to lose a loved one? Or are you a true crime narrative with a beginning, a middle, and an end? And it does make for difficult storytelling But when we get it right, I think it's very powerful.
Viewers have to care about the victim. And some victims are harder to care about than others, but it's the job of the producer to make sure that the audience buys into caring about the victim, because otherwise there's no reason to really hang on till the end.
If you don't care, you're not going to watch. That's
no, absolutely. Coming back to you for a second, John, are you commissioning, actively still commissioning? You talked about constraints of advertising, etc.
Yeah. We are commissioning programs in the way that Will works for us, where the money is led usually by the international portion of the deal. In other words, outside the U.S., and we come in and fill in whatever gap there is. It's sort of the opposite of what a producer thinks about. Normally, we'll say, "I'll get most of my money from the U.S. and then fill in from ex-U.S." We're the opposite, and that's just because the constraints of our business are such that we have to keep costs relatively low in order to be profitable. So we've managed to work it out because we have innovative producers like Will, who are able to both figure out a plan, produce the show, and also figure out the puzzle of the international financing scheme. They're both creative architects and very attentive and successful entrepreneurs.
And from a broadcasting perspective, where do you see true crime programming going next?
I see some appetite spurred by things that have been big successes on streamers for what I'd call limited series, where you have 4 or 5 episodes to tell a story. So think Tiger King on Netflix, which is a true crime story and fascinating, and it gets so many elements in it that it's impossible not to watch. Other limited series where you've got a big story arc that won't fit well into a half-hour or an hour program, and it needs to be told in either feature film, feature doc length, or 3 episodes or 4 episodes. And there's more of an appetite for that than there was before, stimulated, I think, by the likes of Tiger King. But there continues to be a demand for the close-ended episodic series where each episode in a series has a beginning, middle, and end. That is the bread and butter, for example, of investigation discovery. And they've perfected that to an art and really, really done it well. It's kind of a model for people to look at. As has Oxygen. They've come along and done a really good job with that. And I think the appetite for those types of series will not decline because they work. So you've got several types that can coexist, and I think that's good for the business.
Yeah, that the streamers have changed the game. OJ Made in America, which is kind of a combo streamer, conventional broadcaster, really, but that length of programming, that depth of programming, that granular detail, where actually ordinarily I would say they don't want to know about the weather. Actually, a lot of true crime viewers do. They want to know what the temperature was that day, what time it was, and that's been introduced by the fact that streamers can afford the assumption that people want to watch. I mean, most of my career, particularly when I was working in the commercial ITV sector, you had to assume they wanted to switch over. What streamers can do is you have to assume they want to stay, and they've paid for this. So you give them everything that they want, and that is now informing us. And Oxygen, as John says, have done some fantastic work with 2-hour and 3-hour programming. And ID, which was frankly, we all owe ID a debt because they started it all in many respects. They're going to go deeper, I think. We're looking to go deeper, but just as John says, that beginning, middle, and end, straightforward narrative, we call them adjudicated retrospectives. They're the bread and butter of true crime.
Now, you're often dealing with victims of tragic incidents, whether it's families of murder victims or relatives of convicted murderers. How do you negotiate your way around these extremely sensitive situations?
Well, firstly, I don't negotiate in that sense. If the relative of a victim of a murder indicates in any way that they don't want to either appear or assist in the production of the program, I couldn't get out of that arena more quickly, because then I think we as journalists and producers, we become part of their problem. And so in that form, I know you didn't mean it in that sense, but I'm going to leap on that word, that negotiation. I don't. I say to our guys here, your emotional intelligence and your antennae have to be absolutely pricked. And if you sense that people do not want to talk to you, your duty is to simply inform them that the program's being made and then back out. And I think you've also got to give relatives of murdered victims the opportunity to explain why maybe they don't want you to make the program. And you have to respectfully listen. And on half a dozen occasions in the last year, I've just said, fine, we're backing out of this program because it's going to do more harm than good. And we only want it to do good. Sincerely, we really only want it to do good. Mm-hmm. And then on the other side of the coin, I've just got off the phone, in fact, this afternoon, from somebody for a series actually that John's involved with at the moment. And this is a lady whose niece and sister were murdered by the same person during the same crime. She's pleading with us to make a program about the event because she's so determined to raise the issue of escalating domestic violence in that case. Now, sometimes the negotiation is you back out, and sometimes you get pulled in. The other side of the coin, I think it's really important we're not seen to glorify criminals. So if we're dealing with relatives of killers, we're dealing with them because we want to know about the killer. We're dealing with them because we want to know about what happened. But we seldom, in adjudicated retrospective crime, we are seldom dealing with them because they think that the relative is innocent. If we're going to do a program about potential miscarriages of justice, that's one thing. But as a general rule, we hate to give platforms for somebody who's going to claim that their relative is not guilty when it's clear they are. So the rules at that point are very clear. We're not here to fight a battle. We're here to tell a story as well as we can journalistically, and yes, to offer balance, because we've just finished a different series where actually there is plenty of evidence to suggest that one particular killer was created by drugs that he'd been prescribed, a psychotic episode, and there was a reason the event took place, and we're happy to portray that because that's part of the story. But it's what we spend most of our time debating here.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it actually brings me on to my next question for John, which is really around, sometimes it's been suggested that wall-to-wall true crime programming that we see on a number of different channels and streams, etc., can perhaps fuel crime itself. What do you say to that?
I don't think it fuels crime at all. It doesn't give people the idea to commit a crime. I think that the consequences are always bad for the criminal in these shows. So the logic escapes me to say that, showing a crime beginning, middle, and end will encourage other people to commit crimes when it actually should discourage people from committing crimes because we always catch them. And I'm always wondering, my wife always says, why did he buy that big insurance policy on his wife and then kill her? Didn't he know they were going to catch him? I mean, it's true. How many of those do we have before you go, really? You're trying that again? So
you got to keep in mind, Justin, that when America was being born, when Britain was English common law was being laid down, that criminals were put in stocks. They were put on display. And that saying, justice must be seen to be done, it came out of that time because the showing of the justice system was acknowledged as preventing crime. The putting of somebody in the stocks, rightly or wrongly, was basically saying, look, this is what happens. We catch you and you get punished. And it's acknowledged that's why there are press galleries in courts all over the world. It's acknowledged that prevention of crime comes from the reporting of crime. And when you're talking about copycat killers, they seldom copy a television program. They're often watching dramas if they're going to copy anything, but really they're copying the killers, not the reporting of the killers.
It's a fascinating area. And presumably, Will, you see this going, we talked a little bit earlier about it, going from strength to strength, because obviously podcasts now have come into the true crime genres as a new platform. And are you seeing that fueling the industry even more?
but it was led by America. I mean, I think one of the greatest podcasts, which actually I think has revolutionized radio, that was Serial, which was a remarkable. I was so gripped listening to Serial, the podcast, when it was on, that there's a walk from the car park to my office, which is about 800 yards, and there is a step. And I take that step every day of my working life from the car park onto the pathway. And I was so gripped with what I was listening to, I missed my step. I fell head first. Instead of leaping to put my hands out to stop the fall, I put my hands on my headphones to make sure I had what happened. And a woman who was watching, who was doubled over, creased with laughter at this bizarre sight. As I got up, came up and wiped my brow where I'd cut a little bit of my eyebrow. And she said, "What are you listening to?" I said, "I'm listening to Serial." And she mouthed, "Oh, so am I." So she got it immediately.
I hope you sued the producers of Serial for the damages.
I very nearly sent her an email saying, "Hey, here's the plastic surgery I need. But you can't make something as bad as my face worse than it is." So I wasn't optimistic. But no, more seriously, the podcast, it has actually introduced a new generation of true crime viewers. But I tried to make a program which was a television podcast. I was so taken by it. It was a disaster.
Yeah.
So I shan't be doing that again. But I was so impressed by podcasts that way.
We at Tegna, we have a division that produces true crime podcasts. The one called Bardstown was its most successful, about a town in rural Kentucky where there were 5 murders, all unsolved, over a 3-month period. And 2 of them appear to be linked, but it didn't have a solution. It was an unusual set of cases where all of them are still unsolved. That show, I think there were 8 episodes of it, did super numbers, 50,000, 100,000 downloads per episode, and many more. It kind of built over time. And we have seen that and other shows are actually pretty good tools for developing program ideas, because I'm sure Will confirm this. Once you've researched a case, you found out who the officers were, the victims, interviewed some of the people involved. It's a pretty good development, and you can do it very cost effectively for a podcast. Make your podcast, and then you've kind of got a sense of how gripping or not the story is, and you can then take something into TV development. So we're finding that it's a useful thing to do the podcast themselves with advertiser support, and they're also useful for TV development.
If you haven't heard Bardstown, it's fascinating. I mean, it required listening in our office. When people apply for jobs, I ask them what podcasts they listen to, and because it's always a good guide. And if they've got Bardstown or Serial on it, they get through the door.
Right. Well, we'll put links to both of those podcasts in the episode description of this week's show. Now we've reached that point in the show where we get to listen to our guest's story of the week, listening to what developments in the TV industry, news agenda have caught their eyes. John, what's your story of the week?
My story of the week is what happened to TV's fall season in the United States. We used to be inundated with promos and new shows and exciting new things to watch, with all the networks tossing new things our way. And this year, it's like stony silence because the big dramas and comedies, they haven't been able to produce. They've got some things out there that actually involve the pandemic, so it has people, love stories with people on Zoom. But there's only so much you can do with that. So my big story is it's called Silent September and October in the U.S., when we should be bombarded with new shows and we're not. And that's all because of the pandemic. For us, because we're primarily acquisition driven, we've been able to keep pace. And the other thing is working with companies like Will's to produce in a cost-effective way despite the pandemic. We've been able to fill our pipeline. So we're not seeing a big problem for our networks, but the networks that are competitive with, and they're not competitive with us because we're broadcast, but the cable networks are having trouble because you need lots of new material. It's just harder to get it right now. And there's something about TV where a rising tide lifts all boats. So if you have new big series coming on broadcast, it kind of creates an excitement where people get on, they might like what they see, but they also start to, troll around for other things. So I think the rising tide does lift all boats, and the tide is pretty low right now.
Interesting. Will, how about you? What story of the week caught your eye?
So following on from John's observation, we in the last 7 days have been contacted by 5 distributors, 3 different countries, pleading with us for content. Have you got anything that would satisfy SVOD needs, cable channel needs from your back catalogue? Because they haven't been able to get hold of new content. 3 of these were newborn distributors. So there seems to be a rush into the industry at the moment of distributors. These are people who've maybe just left a distribution company or they've sold out and their 3 years is up or whatever the case may be. But there's just this knocking on the door all the time. Can you give us more content? It worries me slightly because you don't want too many distributors. And it's not a question also, for me anyway, when I work with a collaboration, John will confirm, we like to collaborate with distributors to help us put content on screen. If everybody just comes in and says, give us your old content, then we're not going to be making new content. But that's been quite striking to me this week.
We've obviously seen TCB duo Paul Heaney and Dina Sabani launch their new distribution company, Bossa Nova, out of the ashes of TCB and the Q debacle. So wishing them all the very best of luck with their new venture. And indeed, there were 1 or 2 other offshoots as well from Q. It's obviously a fascinating time for distributors because that tap of new content is starting to run dry a little bit. And as I think a lot of people expected, maybe end of this year, beginning of next year, that thirst for new content, it's not going to be there, right?
I think the thirst is there. It's been modulated by the pandemic. If you look 5 months out, for example, you might see a lot more openings going on. Networks plan, on a 6 to 18 month time horizon. So if I'm a network right now and I'm betting that there will be, vaccinations available, at least for people for essential work, which you might be able to get away with for TV production, you will be able to see safe production with methods that are available by sometime in January. So you're planning that right now. So I think there's going to be a rush to fill the gaps once things start to settle down. And I think you'll see this, this big wave of demand cresting.
But I guess from a distributor perspective, now they're going to be more thirsty than ever for those new shows because, they've been looking for back catalogue over the summer from producers. And we're obviously, MIPCOM is next week. And, that's when presumably a lot of buying and selling is still going to go on. But yeah, it's going to be a very interesting time going towards the end of the year and early next year. And will presumably over the pandemic period, having a big back catalogue like yours of many, many shows and many seasons of many shows, that's been something that has been really helpful.
I've been delighted to be able to help a couple of channels by just delving back into the catalogue and giving them a new brand because they desperately needed to launch. Just again, to John's point, they needed something for the autumn schedule and they had nothing. And we were able to go into our back catalogue. But there are editorial concerns on that because these stories don't end when the bad guy's locked up. We've got to be careful what we do on that. We need new content. There's no, you can't carry on taking in the washing, from that guy next door who's taking in your washing. You've got to generate new industry content. And I personally can't wait for this all to go away, this pandemic. Although I am so impressed by how people in the field and our company has done remarkable things in keeping the wheels turning.
Oh yeah, the innovation that Will and others have undertaken to continue to produce in this environment is really impressive. It's really fantastic.
Now we've got to that point in the show where we get to hear our guests' hero of the week and who or what they want to throw in the bin. Will, starting with you, who's your hero of the week?
Crumbs. I pitched up with one hero, and I have to say today's events have changed things a bit. But I got a call from a prosecuting attorney out of central Pennsylvania who'd given an interview with 48 Hours. and he was really unhappy with the way it was edited. So he said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you my file electronically with an outline of all of the material I've got. And this guy, and I can't name him yet, this guy was the roster prosecuting attorney. He just happened to pick up the phone next 6 years ago when he took a call and had to carry on with the case. And little did he know, within months, he would be the subject of murder threats. The mob would get involved. His children were subject to murder threats. And he went through the twists and turns of the most remarkable 6-year attempt to put away some bad people. And he's so desperate to have him and his colleagues and the detective involved at the center of the story that he's done something which I've really experienced. He said, you can have everything we've got. Just tell this story. It's so important. So he's kind of my hero of the week in that sense.
Wow, that's amazing, Will. Somebody you really appreciate, I'm sure.
I did appreciate it. And he emailed us because of a program that's on your channel, actually. It's on True Crime Network. He'd seen a detective story that we'd done for John and followed the link at the end of the logo and Googled us.
There will be a fee coming, right, for that?
Yeah, well, I'm going to be quiet now.
Maybe we're even now.
It's costing me money now, Justin. It's costing me money, this conversation. So he's my hero.
All right, fantastic. How about you, John? Who's your hero of the week?
A man who's been in the industry a long time, started Left Field Production, sold it to ITV, then became head of ITV, and now has his own company, Wheelhouse, and that's Brent Montgomery. Brent is a friend, and just this week, he let me take a peek at what he's doing. He's started this sort of nexus to bring Hollywood talent, entrepreneurs, and producers and distributors together to create content and also business opportunities and fund venture capital that's interesting to them as well. So it's a sort of interesting new style of creative nexus that brings all these different elements around the industry together. First, he's locating ITV America in a new office that he's built called The Village. It's an office complex in Greenwich or Stamford, Connecticut. He also has big operations in LA and New York. So he's taking all of this presence and doing some incredible deals with the likes of, Jimmy Kimmel, LeBron James, just a list of stars that's really impressive. And I have to say, he's sort of setting the stage for a new type of creative / business entrepreneurship.
Right. Okay. And this is under his Wheelhouse Entertainment.
Wheelhouse Entertainment. So worth a look to see all that they're doing, because it's a pretty good model, I think.
That's another link we'll post up in the episode description. Now, what's going to go in the bin? Will, what's going in your bin?
COVID.
Yes.
I've just decided it's had its day. No bug's going to beat me. I'm not going to take my mask off for the cameras, though.
Right. How about you, John? What's going in your bin?
The American presidential debates. Which
Got to interrupt you there, John. I saw it on the debate. I have to interrupt you now.
Yeah. You have to interrupt me, and I have to angrily come
Shut
back.
up, man.
Yeah, you're a clown. They were disgusting, and I think, but in some way, kind of in a weird way, edifying, because you got a good look at the personas, Trump and Biden, and the Trump persona was so extreme that I think you've said, that's who this guy is. And the Biden persona was generally pretty calm and steady and did well. So in a way, the debates were stupid and unruly, but they might have served a purpose at the end.
Yeah, I have to admit, I was a bit disappointed with Biden. I've always seen him as being presidential in the way that Obama, you always saw Obama was presidential, and he has been since he's left office. He's never stooped to the sort of Trump level of doing things. But Biden, I was surprised. Do you think he was rattled by Trump? Do you think, the whole shut up man, or do you?
I think he was a little rattled by Trump, but it's kind of understandable. You have like a rabid dog biting your arm. I think you're going to get rattled. It felt like that. Anyway, interesting, but we're not proud of it. But maybe it served a purpose.
Well, the twists and turns with the American election. I'm sure we're going to return to this over the coming weeks on TellyCast in the run-up to the election itself. But Trump going into hospital is the latest episode in this ongoing drama. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me this week. Really, really interesting to hear, your thoughts on true crime and where the genre's going and some of the secrets, if you like, of what makes a fantastic true crime show. So thank you again for joining us, and I really look forward to seeing you in person very soon.
Thanks, Justin. Thank you, John. Great to hear your voice.
Thank you, Justin, and great to be on the same stage as you, Will.
Now it's time in the show to visit Girts Licis again from K7 Media. Girts, how are you this week?
I'm very well, thank you, Justin. How about you?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm very well. We're talking about true crime this week.
True, yeah. That's true.
Which is, obviously really fascinating. We spoke to Will and John earlier on in the show. Really interested to hear your take on the true crime genre.
I think we have been talking before quite a lot about the increasing trend of series based on true events in general, or inspired by true events, but true crime obviously stands out. And technically there are, I think, several reasons why this genre is already predisposed to receive a lot of attention. Because similarly to when we are speaking about IP-based drama, particularly the loudest cases are already recognizable to a certain part of the public. And the mix of the best from both worlds, documentary and drama tools used in production, can also attract broader audiences than just strictly documentary or strictly drama viewers. And like with pretty much every genre, true crime has been evolving, maturing, if you wish, finding new ways of storytelling. Since true crime is also a genre in literature and also in podcasts more recently, of course, particularly from the books, we can see how diverse it can be, with such subgenres as cold cases, conspiracies, white-collar crime, psychological terror, cult, surrealist terror. So we can expect them to be turned into screen work sooner or later as well. And obviously, murder and serial killers in particular are the bread and butter of true crime, but it's definitely not everything this genre has to offer. However, the reasons I mentioned are more like just technical catalysts facilitating audience reaction. And according to many experts, the real reasons of the popularity and addictiveness of the true crime lie in human psychology, as this genre is perfectly playing with human instincts and emotions.
Well, yeah, that was something we were discussing earlier on. Tell us more about it from your perspective.
Is the darkness of the subject matter what makes true crime stories so compelling? As humans, we want to understand the darker side of our nature, and true crime stories allow us to explore that in a safe way, from a safe distance. Psychologists say that one of the main reasons we are obsessed with true crime is because it gives us an opportunity to feel relieved that we are not the victim, that it happened to someone else rather than you. In some weird way, it's a human nature to get enjoyment from the trouble experienced by other people. It's not necessarily sadistic, but if bad faith had to fall on someone, at least it fell on someone else. Evil fascinates us. It gives us adrenaline rush. Our fascination begins when we are young. Even as kids, we are drawn to the tension between good and evil, and true crime embodies our fascination with that dynamic. The euphoric effect of true crime on human emotions is similar to that of roller coasters or natural disasters. Some even say that, for instance, stories about serial killers are like fairy tales for grown-ups. There's something in our psyche where we have this need to tell stories about being pursued by monsters, and that's where the true crime arrives to replace the monster movies we are used to watch as children. Serial killers tantalize people much like traffic accidents, train wrecks, or natural disasters. In other words, the actions of a serial killer may be horrible to behold, but much of the public simply cannot look away due to the spectacle, in the same way they can't turn away from an accident or even a catastrophe, no matter how distressful we might feel about it. And that is also something that media, especially news, is playing with our heads almost 24/7, this mix of fascination and fear.
So we're saying it's almost like sort of TV rubbernecking, if you like?
Exactly. But it's also learning about crime, especially about murders. Who is more likely to be a murderer? How do these crimes happen? Who are the victims, etc. People are also learning about ways to prevent becoming a victim themselves. True stories also put us inside the narrative like no other drama can, asking ourselves, what would I have been like? How would I have behaved in this situation? There's lots of research showing that the fear of crime is more prevalent than crime itself, and that if we can understand the motivation and the backstory, then we do feel that we have more control over our own lives and the world in general. A 2010 study by the University of Illinois found that women are more likely to be attracted to true crime stories than men, while men are more likely to be both the perpetrators and the victims of violent crime. Women are more fearful of being attacked. And there's an argument that women, especially, are drawn to true crime stories as a survival reflex because by learning about crime and murder, who is more likely to be a criminal, how do these crimes happen, who are the victims, and so on. People are also learning about ways to prevent becoming a victim themselves.
What about the enjoyment of just playing the armchair detective?
Certainly. Playing an armchair detective is another dimension which attracts many viewers to true crime. Many stories raise more questions than they answer, whether it's who the perpetrator is, if the correct verdict was reached, or how the police handled the case. The stories which turn out to be the most popular do leave some of that up to viewers' imagination. That's what good storytelling does. Because although these series are based on real life cases, they are storytelling. They are very well edited and very well put together storytelling. And also, they allow us to feel our compassion, not only a compassion for the victim, but sometimes also compassion for the perpetrator in a way. For me personally, as a viewer, this is actually the sign of the highest mastery of creators when they are capable to get under the skin of the criminals and without justifying them, of course, still making me see something much more than just a monster. Like when watching, for instance, the assassination of Versace from American Crime Stories, I admit, yes, I was totally fascinated by the evil character of Andrew Cunanan in some weird way. And what's also interesting, I think, is that viewers are taking this genre really seriously. And I'm saying that not just because Making the Murderer is among the top rated series on IMDb, but also because they only try to make some fun of this genre. That's on top of my mind, at least. The true crime parody series, American Vandal on Netflix, was cancelled after just 2 seasons, which makes me think that Netflix probably was not too happy with its performance. And on scheduled channels, true crime has increasingly moved from late night to prime and even daytime, becoming more of a family viewing. And this is also something that makes it even more story driven. And also looking beyond murder cases, like fraud, for instance, such as Fire Festival or Quiz, the story behind the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire's cheating case, or scandals. From more recent ones like Jeffrey Epstein's going back in time to Profumo Affair and Christine Keeler and beyond. So I think we can rightly expect true crime as a genre to continue evolving and mutating, becoming more multidimensional, deeper, personal, more complex in a way. It's not going to be that easy to identify the good guys and the bad guys anymore. I can't even actually exclude situation when it moves away from its roots far enough to emerge as a different new genre after all. As one of the crazy things, but essential to the true crimes DNA, is that as horrific as they are, they end up being comforting. Quoting a sociology professor of Maryland University, while living in a world where there is rapid social, political, economic, and technological change, true crime comforts people by assuring them that their long held ideas about how the world works are still useful. But here my question is, for how long they still will be?
It is extraordinary the way that true crime has evolved, and it just seems to keep on building as a genre in terms of its popularity. You see, Netflix has obviously had a big effect on that, but also all these specialist cable channels around the world that seem to be doing really great numbers. It's a really interesting subject.
Absolutely, it's enormously diverse. It's probably never-ending mutating we can expect there.
Fantastic. Girts, it's great to have you back on the show. Really enjoyed that. Thanks for taking the time to join us again, and we'll speak to you next week.
Speak soon. Take care.
And now it's that time of the show where we go over to LA to speak to Peter White from Deadline Hollywood. Peter, how are you? You well?
Hey, Justin. Yeah, I'm good. All good here. Just trying to ignore the chaos of 2020.
Yeah, as are we all. But I guess you're not going to be able to ignore the whole presidential debate and everything there's got to be wall-to-wall coverage right now on that particular show a few days ago.
It's pretty wild to think that the debate, or if you can call it a debate, between Trump and Biden was only a week ago, given what's happened in the subsequent 7 days. So yeah, it's felt a pretty strange. Yeah, as you can imagine, wall-to-wall coverage of this president who, despite getting COVID, has now come out and said he feels better than ever and don't worry about it. And we've got the vice presidential debate. Now they're arguing as to whether plexiglass is needed. So yeah, it's been a pretty strange and wild news cycle over here. One that I certainly haven't seen, and certainly I can't imagine many people have. So yeah, we'll see what happens next.
Yeah, I can imagine it would have been not very well received in Hollywood, right? I mean, Hollywood is as left-leaning as you would tend to get in the US.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and you can sort of look at like a week ago, the biggest news that, apart from Trump just shouting at Biden, was essentially sparked by Hollywood. People like Ava DuVernay, really sort of latching on to the fact that the president of the United States refused to condemn white supremacists. And that was sort of soon taken over by the health news. But yeah, it's been pretty strange. We've sort of covered it tangentially. We've covered the whole Trump presidency in many ways, given he's a reality TV star over the last 3.5 years. So I'm sure there'll be a few more October surprises that we'll be covering in the next few weeks ahead of the election.
Well, it'd be interesting for us to look at programming and how that's going to be organized around not only the presidential debates, of course, but, what networks are going to drop what kind of shows. Because obviously America, obviously social media is massively influential, but perhaps this time more than any other, TV becomes the most influential medium, right, in terms of voting, in terms of the run-up to the actual voting days.
It does, and look, the networks are still sort of acting like this is a usual cycle. It's not, and the way that the people are covering the news right across the world, but certainly here, it's not ever been seen before. So yeah, it's interesting you say how that's going to be covered. There's still an element of, we should try and make it balanced, even if one side is saying things that aren't necessarily true. So yeah, look, the next few weeks are going to be pretty strange from a political point of view, from a television point of view, and from everything else. I think it's going to be slightly unusual.
Well, we'll look forward to you bringing us up to date with all of that as we get towards the big day. How about regular TV news? What's the news in town from the more regular TV side of the TV industry?
You say regular news as if we haven't been living through a global pandemic in the last 7 months. It is funny, there is still an element of that going on. People still developing, still people buying rights to things. But no, I think look, we're being largely led by this. We've still been writing a lot about what's been coming back to production. I thought this was an interesting story for you. The cancellation of Netflix's Glow that we broke this week, and that was down to COVID. I thought that was one of the more interesting stories of the week because it talks to a slightly wider point, and Netflix has done this before. They did a U-turn with the second seasons of The Society and a show called I Am Not Okay With This. Given that Netflix has done, by all accounts, relatively well out of the pandemic, people staying in and watching streaming, Tiger King was the most talked about show at the top of the pandemic, and their viewing doesn't feel like it's gone down, even though we never really get any numbers. So for them to sort of cancel shows that they had already committed to, this isn't, making a decision. These were shows that they had recommissioned, they'd renewed. Glow, for instance, was renewed for a fourth and final season. So if you're a big fan of the show, you're going to be pretty gutted because it basically just didn't end. And they said they didn't want to, they didn't really want to finish it because I guess the worry for them is by the time it's back on air, it'll be over 2 years from season 3. So they wondered whether people would pay attention to it. Which is a bit odd given that Netflix lives in a world where everything's on their service forever and everything original at least. So you have to wonder whether, it sort of does come down to a little bit of question in Hollywood is, does Netflix ever really care about anything after season 3, which has been mentioned quite a lot. And as to whether there might be any other sort of wider problems there, Netflix seeing some cost cutting perhaps. I certainly hasn't felt like that up until these, but yeah, it's interesting. And look, it's not the only show. Stumptown, which was an ABC show, had a similar thing with Kobe Smulders drama. But yeah, I think we're just getting into this. I have a feeling there might be a few more over the next coming months. Not everything's gone back into production, and I'm not sure everything will.
Well, there's two terms that don't usually go together: Netflix and cost cutting.
They've paid everyone on this, so I don't know how much of this is cost cutting, but there will be some. There were only a couple of weeks into production by all accounts. They'd done a sort of episode or two of season 4. But yeah, it's interesting. They do have the money. You sort of think, why didn't they just see it through? There was an interesting. The two creators had an interesting quote or an interesting statement. Because on one hand they're obviously saying, COVID's killed actual humans, so it does seem a bit much complaining about a TV show. But they're saying COVID took down our show. Netflix has decided not to finish filming the final season of Glow. We were handed the creative freedom to make a complicated comedy about women and tell their stories, and now that's gone. They're sort of making the point. It's a bit shitty for them and fans of that show. But yeah, I have a feeling this won't be the last of the casualties.
Maybe it was just the increased cost of production, right? Maybe it was something to do with that. But well, I guess we can all speculate all day long.
Yeah, but it's certainly increased costs. Over here, the 10 to 15%. Some are even saying up to 20%. Once you factor in all the extra costs, because there's specific costs to COVID, whether that's having medical professionals on set and some of the zoning and things that you have to do. But there's also a hidden cost. I'll give you an example from a show I wrote about the other day, was The Masked Singer. They actually booked more celebrities this year for The Masked Singer than in previous years, because they had assumed that one or two might drop out, whether from health concerns or just worries. And in fact, none of them actually did. So that they ended up with more celebrities. And you can't really put that down as a COVID cost, but they wouldn't have done it otherwise. So I think, there's a lot of hidden costs to this as well.
We spoke to CJ E&M last week, and we were doing a South Korean special. And I know that I Can See Your Voice debuted on Fox a week or so ago. Any idea on how it went down? Yeah,
well, yes, it's really interesting, isn't it, that Fox has sort of become the home to these Korean formats with that and The Masked Singer. Ken Jeong is their sort of their reality star. He's performing better than a lot of their shows. I haven't got the numbers to hand, but I think it did decent numbers for linear. Although, what does that mean these days? But no, Craig Plestis, who also produces that show, has been looking around the Asian market, and I think many others are as well. I wouldn't be surprised if, given the success of both of those shows, there will be a few more South Asian formats coming into the States over the next 12 months.
We were talking about a dating music show last week with Diane Min, head of formats there. So maybe that's what you can all expect in the States over the coming years. We'll see. Peter, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us this week. Enjoy the vice presidential debate if it actually happens.
Lovely. Thanks, Justin. Speak to you soon.
Cheers. Well, that's about it for another week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to TellyCast and share it with friends and colleagues. And don't forget to listen out for our special MIPCOM Online Plus shows, when we'll be previewing the market and then rounding up the day's main news on Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday with the industry's top TV journalists. This week's show was presented in association with Moore Kingston Smith. If you want to hear about our advertising and sponsorship packages, please email justin@boomdialogue.com. That's justin@boomdialogue.com, and you'll find that email address in the episode description. TellyCast was edited by Ian Chambers. Thanks as ever for tuning in, and as always, stay safe.